One narrative encapsulates so much, I think, of Jesus' victory over this spirit world. If we go fast forward into the New Testament, and we take a look at specifically how Jesus interfaced spiritual things, and it's this narrative in Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 31. And so we got Jesus and the disciples, and it says they sailed to the region of Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. Now, this is an area that is predominantly Gentile. Normally when Jesus is traveling around in the Gospels, and Jesus will even say this at times, he says that he was sent to his people Israel. But this is I think, possibly the only story where Jesus specifically goes to a Gentile area. That is, Gentile meaning not a Jewish person. And so they go here to the region of Gerasenes, and it says, when he got out on land, a demon-possessed man from the town met him. So this guy just comes straight out as they're getting off the boat. It says, for a long time he had worn no clothes and did not stay in a house, but lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and said in a loud voice, what do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? He recognizes that Jesus is king over everything. He's the son or the prince of the highest God. That if you think about the ancient world and you believe that, the people of the Bible, the biblical times, they believed that there was a God over every different country, and that they believed in pantheons or hierarchies of gods. And by that, they mostly just meant like hierarchies of spiritual beings that have various power and authority. That's what Paul was talking about when he said that we war against rulers, authorities, against the cosmic powers of darkness. People have tried to take Paul's words there in Ephesians 6 and place them into like a pantheon type of hierarchy. And that's what's happening here, is he's saying, you are the Son of the Most High. That as that hierarchy goes up, there is Yahweh, the God of Israel, the Almighty God who is at the top. And he recognizes Jesus, this demon does, as his own son. And so he's freaking out. He's like, what are you doing here? The Son of God, very God, what are you doing here? I beg you, don't torment me. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was guarded, bound by chains and shackles, he would snap the restraints and be driven by the demon into deserted places. That's where demons go, is into the wilderness. What is your name? Jesus asked him. Legion, he said, because many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to banish them into the abyss. There's a couple of things happening here. So first of all, the demon knows that Jesus has like all authority. Just like Jesus said in the Great Commission, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. He's like, this demon, whatever authority he may have thought he had at one point in time, he does not have that authority when Jesus stands before him. Maybe he has authorities in some sort of spiritual hierarchy in the cosmic powers of darkness, but not when Jesus shows up. When Jesus shows up, he is higher than all things. And there's an interesting thing that happens here, because when Jesus encounters demons within the Israelites, it seems to be an anomaly. It seems to be a very strange thing, that it shouldn't be happening. And if we look at sort of the historic writings of Israel and the church, as you come up to the birth of Christ, you start to see demons showing up in the Jewish literature. And they never show up before that. Like almost never are demons mentioned. There's about 10 times in the Old Testament that demons are mentioned, and they're never mentioned doing things like what we see in the Gospels. You ever think about that? Have you ever noticed that reading the Bible? That we take for granted that you get to the book of Matthew, you finish the Old Testament, you get to the book of Matthew, and all of a sudden, it's like talking about the devil and demons all the time, and you're like, well, I know that there's a couple places in the Old Testament where Satan or the devil shows up, or the serpent, but where are demons, and why do they just ramp up right here at Jesus' life? Well, it's because it's spiritual warfare. It's because God became man. He came incarnate into the world to conquer the spirits that were ruling over this world. And so they take up their forces. They get their armies ready. And so as Jesus is coming into the world and they see this happening, they start to ramp up their military efforts. And we start to see demons coming into even Israel. Now, this is a bit speculative, but if you look at the literature of the Gentile world, I'm not sure I can put my finger specifically on any characters of the other mythologies of like Greek mythology or Roman mythology or even like back to Canaanite mythology and say, see, these are demons there. But there is demonic things happening all over that literature. And so I say this is speculative, but I think that the demons, that God was allowing them to do what they wanted outside of the kingdom of Israel. In Deuteronomy 32 that we read last week, Moses said this, that the Lord appointed, that he appointed sons of God over all the nations, but Israel is Yahweh's portion. That Israel was protected, it was special, it was different, it was for God, very God, and the demons weren't allowed there. And I think that's why we don't see it in the Jewish literature. And then Jesus comes and casts them out whenever he sees them. And the reason for this is, first of all, that they don't belong there, but it's also to exercise his authority over the spiritual world, to show that he has come to conquer. He has come to have victory, that they cannot be present among God's people. And so he casts them out. And you can see that the demoniac, he's confused about this. He says, what do you want with me, Jesus? Right? He's like, what are you doing here in Gerasenes? This is my land. This is where I'm allowed to be here. Why did you come here? And then Jesus starts to cast him out, and he's like, why are you tormenting me, right? And then he begs him not to send him into the abyss. Now, I think it's interesting because he says his name is Legion, for there were many that came into him. And this is just kind of a side thought, but that word legion is the same word, and now it doesn't always have to mean this. Those things are so loud. It can just mean like multitude or many. But it's also the word that you would use in a military sense if you were like, hey, go get your legions so we can go attack that city. And so it's sort of a multi-use word, and I wonder here if Luke, when he wrote this, didn't have spiritual warfare in mind when he used that word for legion, to say that there's an entire army of demons inside of this man, and yet they tremble before the almighty Son of God. I think that's amazing. It shows Jesus' power over the spiritual world. There's also sort of power, not just in the sense of like might, like how much weight you can lift, not just powerful like that, like Jesus can punch those demons in the face, but also power in the sense of authority, like kingly power, because they beg Jesus not to send them into the abyss. And we tend to use the word like hell. Sometimes the word Hades or Sheol is used in the Old Testament, Hades in the New Testament. And what they're saying is, don't send us to the bad place. And this bad place that is called the abyss in the scriptures is like a waiting place where the sinful, the fallen angels, have been sent to await judgment on the day of the Lord. So when Jesus returns for his church, he also comes to judge the world. And we're told in Revelation then that place of death, that abyss, is cast into the eternal lake of fire. So it's like this bad place that's a waiting place for the eternal bad place, if you will. And so there's what we call like a judgment power in Jesus, even at this time as he walks the face of this earth, that Jesus is able to cast this entire legion of demons into the abyss, into this place of chains where they're bound until the day of the Lord, until the last day. Now, I look at this and I think like, okay, we've got a man possessed by demons. And I'm not I'm not sure that throughout history Christians have always interpreted possession as exactly the same thing. I'm fond of another term, demonization. And demonization is a general term that refers to the idea that demons can influence people in certain ways. But if you want to think possess in the sense of a spirit coming into a person to try to control them, I think this might be one of a handful of places you can really argue for that, because they actually ask him as the story goes on. The demons say, okay, well, if you're going to cast us out, will you send us into those pigs? And then they go into the pigs, and the pigs go and drown themselves to release the spirits back into the world so they can go out and possess somebody else. And so there does seem to be an internalizing of the evil spirits that is happening here in this situation. Okay, why is that important? Well, because one of the questions that Christians often ask is, can a Christian be demon possessed? Or should I be concerned about demon possession? And that's a really good question. One argument against it that I've heard a lot is that, well, if you have the Holy Spirit within you, then there's no room for another spirit that is lesser in authority and power, right? The Holy Spirit is the Spirit of the living God. It's Christ's Spirit. And so why would Jesus want an unclean spirit in you where he lives, right? So that's one of the ideas. And if Jesus has already had victory over these spirits, then why would he be like, yeah, I know I already kicked you out before, but why don't you come on in, right? That there's that kind of, hey, there's no room for you here type of thing. And that's a good argument, except that there is something with sort of within the framework of how God created humankind that for some reason, even when we do absolutely hateful and evil things, God lets humans do hateful and evil things. And it seems to me that there's a pattern where people invite evil in various ways. If you consider a Gentile, this Gentile man in the story who's got this legion of demons in him, Gentiles worshipped at the temples of demons. They participated in the drinking of blood and acts of sexual immorality and things of this that are forbidden by God's law. They're specifically considered to be acts of devotion to fallen angels, to these demonic beings. And so if this guy's participating in that, he's inviting that, right? And so I am not sure that the presence of the Holy Spirit in you means that you can't be involved in demonic things if indeed you invite that demonic thing into your life. In other words, you may be a God-fearing Christian today, but if you begin to pursue demonic things, that if you start to harbor sin in your life in such a way that that you have embraced it in such a way that it violates your loyalty to Jesus Christ, then I think, yeah, there's a possibility you can be affected by demons in various ways. 2 Timothy 2:26 is another argument against demon possession. It says that opponents of Christ might come to their senses and escape the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. And all I want to point out there in that is that the devil takes people captive to do his will. And if you're willing to do the devil's will, then I think maybe you can be captured by him in the same way as an unbeliever. So I think there's a possibility. Ephesians 2:2, the Apostle Paul calls the devil the spirit that is now at work among those who are disobedient. And he specifically has in mind there those who are disobedient to God's law. And this is where I think that when you are a Christian, and maybe you have a long history of being a Christian, but if you decide that you are going to pursue those things that are distinctly against God, you begin to work for disobedience instead of obedience to Christ, then yes, I think demons, that might open you up to potentially demon possession or to possibly what we call demon oppression in certain ways, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's a difference, I think, between what we call possession and oppression. And so Jesus comes to this demon. He casts this legion of demons and he casts them out. And what I think is happening is that when Jesus was born, he's as God incarnate, God in human flesh. It's what we might call the inauguration of Christ's kingship. And think about what an inauguration is. Inauguration is a formal appointment to an office. And we're actually going to see at the end of Jesus' life, after he dies and he raises from the dead, he then ascends to the right hand of the Father and is seated on God's throne. Okay? So that's his enthroning. But Jesus is exercising power over the spirit world, even in life. And so most sort of scholars have said his inauguration, his formal appointment, his kingship happened even before he ascended to the throne. And so what we actually see from the time that Jesus comes into the world, all the way through our time and into the end, that the nations are still under the oppression of spiritual beings. Oppression means to crush or to burden by abuse of power or authority. And it's sort of this idea that Jesus came as king over all things. He came as king over all things. And I'm not going to get into this too much because we talked about it last week. But part of the Great Commission is taking the message of Jesus' kingship out to the nations. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go disciple the nations. That's the Great Commission. And we're supposed to take the message of Jesus' kingship out into the world where demons are saying, no, I'm still king here. To go to all these countries, to all these different nations, all these different ethnicities where they're worshiping demonic entities and to say, no, Jesus is king. And I love this word oppression because you see this. Go pick your tribal culture. Go pick your third world nation. You can see this very clearly, that the people of the nations are being oppressed. And you say, no, they're being oppressed by humans. It's their governments. It's the rulers over those governments. They're the wicked ones. It's not spiritual beings. No, and you look at maybe countries and tribes in Africa and Papua New Guinea and different places in South America, and you're like, no, they're oppressing each other. They're just fighting with each other, and it's one regime against another. It's all about humans being wicked people. And I'll just remind you the very first word we read in chapter 6 of Ephesians. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against cosmic powers of darkness. I know it looks like it's human activity, but if you would pray that God would lift that veil off your eyes so that you could see, then you would see legions of angels fighting against legions of demons. That's really what's at play here. And there is this interplay between the demons, who they know. We saw it in the story of the demoniac in Gerasenes. They know that Jesus has authority over them. But they are still fighting for every soul that they can grab. Every one of yours and every one of the nations. And so that's where we're kind of at in history. The gospel is the message that Jesus indeed has power over those gods, over those spiritual beings. And so the gospel then needs to be delivered before the end comes, before the consummation comes. And so there is indeed a spiritual oppression that is happening in the world. The Great Commission, the taking of the message that Jesus is king and has authority over those demons, that he has indeed conquered them, he has victory. That is the message that saves those people. But then the question that we want to ask, and especially in a sort of a place. The Western world's interesting. We have the luxury of having thousands of different brands of Christianity, like within an hour drive of us. Have you ever thought about this? That there are, and I call it brands because I'm a little cynical, but there are what we call denominations, different offshoots of Christianity that think a little bit different about different things. You know, Catholics and Protestants and Baptists and Presbyterians and Pentecostals and fundamentalists, and we've got all these different ways of thinking, and that's a luxury, but it makes us ask questions about the differences, and one of those differences is really this: how do we think about the spiritual world? And many of you have had questions for me historically about spiritual oppression specifically. Like, if I'm a Christian, if I love Jesus, if I follow Jesus, can I be affected by demonic things? And so put a pin in whether or not a Christian can be possessed by a demon, because I think this is a bit clearer. Because if you think about how demons oppress, they have no authority, and yet they try to exercise authority. Pun intended. Anyway, oppression relies on lies. Oppression relies on lies. Oppression is when a demonic entity comes to you, however it comes to you, through a person, through a thought, through media of some kind, through on the wings of the wind, it just comes into your mind, right? Like, oppression is when a lie comes into your mind and it says, is Jesus really king? Because if he's not, maybe you should do this. They're the lies. They're the temptation. They're the serpent coming to Eve in the garden and saying, did God really say? And the oppressive evil force wants to make you think, well, maybe life would be different, maybe even better, if I did it my way instead of God's way. And it's these lies and these deceits. Nobody will know. I can get away with it. I can make this happen. It'll work out in the end. The end justifies the means. It's these little lies that come in to steal your loyalty away from Jesus Christ. And that's what spiritual oppression is. It's lies that the enemy speaks. Lies that are perpetuated across the globe to keep the nations under bondage to spiritual beings. That even though the demons are not king, the nations are still serving them as kings. They're being deceived by these lies. And we have the gospel. We have the message. We know the truth about the spiritual war that Christ is not only going to win the war, he already is the victorious king who has already conquered and already has all authority. Again, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, disciple the nations. Go get the nations, Jesus said. And we will do that. That's the goal of the church. It's the job of the church, the responsibility of the church, until what we call the consummation, the end, Jesus' return. Because Jesus' return is going to be the official end to all things oppressive in the spiritual world. Consummation means complete or finalized. It's the signature on the dotted line. It's the notary stamp when you complete a contract. It's the finishing, the finalization of all things. And maybe you compare that to the inauguration. Like we believe Jesus inaugurated kingship, that he came as king. We read the stories. We see him acting out his authority. And so we believe in his authority. But then we actually bow before him at the throne in the consummation. When we enter into the eternal kingdom of God. It's the completion of Jesus' purpose in his office. So I want to talk about that consummation, specifically the judgment that's going to occur. Because we've been talking about spiritual war in the sense of fighting against spiritual beings. But there's something bigger at stake. Matthew 25:41, Jesus is talking about who is going to live in the eternal kingdom of God and who has destiny in the eternal lake of fire. He says this, I will say to those on the left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Notice what's happening here. He says, you who are cursed, depart into the eternal fire. What is this eternal fire for? It has been prepared for the devil and his angels. That's a reference to the devil himself and sort of the angels, the divine beings that are unjust rulers over the nations. That these demonic spiritual beings, God created an eternal place for them. He created a place of condemnation or a place of punishment for them, an eternal bad place, if you will. And that sort of makes sense. Like, I don't think anybody's like, oh, poor demons, they should be saved. Like, I don't think anybody's thinking that. Like, when we really see and experience demonic things, it does not move us to compassion for demonic beings. It really, and if it does, it shouldn't. And so we're not shocked by this idea of eternal condemnation for evil, demonic, wicked, satanic beings. Like, fill in your adjective there. We got lots of them. The Bible uses lots of them. But notice what else is happening here. That those who are oppressed by those beings, those who believe the lies and remain under the rulership of those demonic beings. They remain under their influence. That they do not acknowledge and come to Christ. That they are actually treated, think about last week's message, as enemies of God. That their eternal resting place is actually with the devil and his angels in the eternal fire. And that is something that a lot of Christians go, wait, hang on a second there. Hang on a second there. Because we do have, especially as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we see all people as imagers of God. That for all the beauty and the love that we have and the holiness of some people who have lived great lives and you know that we would truly want to call saints, holy ones of God, like even for those people, but then even as we look at other people who are making bad decisions, and you all have somebody like this in your life, they're just making bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. They're participating in things that are obviously evil, obviously wicked. They're obviously serving the wrong king. They're serving the false gods, not Jesus. But we still have compassion for them. You know, that's a human being. That is my old friend. That is my relative. That might be a son or a daughter. That might be a parent. And you still have a category of compassion where you wish that they could be saved. And I think that comes from the love of God. God, he's patient in bringing about eternal judgment, wishing that all would come to repentance. That's what Peter tells us. So if you feel that way about people who are lost, even when they're participating in really bad stuff, that is a godly thing. That is the heart of God, to love those people and to wish that they would come to repentance. But the reality is if they do not come to repentance, if they do not forsake those false kings and come to Christ as king, then he will say to them, those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. That is the judgment that is in store for them. And I think that does bring about, I would not say necessarily an urgency for the gospel, but a necessity for the gospel, and necessity to urge your loved ones. Jesus is king. Jesus is king. And he's conquered all that is evil in spiritual places, and come to him. Forsake your false gods and come to him. And that's not always the language we're going to use, but I'm using that language for the sake of the message that we're in. Human punishment is always interrelated with divine punishment. Just in the same way that, again, the Lord lifted the veil from Elisha's servant's eyes and he could see the spiritual war, that the war between nations was really a war between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the world. It was between the heavenly hosts and the cosmic forces of darkness, right? It's always interrelated. And one fruit of the gospel is this freedom from spiritual oppression that brings us under judgment. Let's recap real quick, and then I want to talk to you about a couple of practical things. The victorious king gospel means that Jesus' kingship delivers us from spiritual activity. That's what it means. It means that he has conquered the spirit world, yet the spirits continue to fight against Christ's kingdom until the end comes.